Greetings. We are now at stage 2, determining acceptable evidence and expanding and differentiating assessments. By now, you've completed your stage 1, collecting your standards, establishing your goals and objectives, and getting your enduring understandings and essential questions developed along the theme that you're going to be using for this unit. And now, to go with the bank of objectives that you've designed, we're going to make a bank of acceptable evidence, your assessments. So let's talk about assessment. We're going to kind of review a few things. Assessment can be used 4 ways: for planning and adjusting instruction, which is the formative; for diagnostic assessment, if you want to see what the student knows and what needs to be taught, which is different than formative in the sense that it also looks at the student's skills and abilities. Assessment expertise, going for mastery. Can they meet the standards? Do they meet the standards? Have they achieved what was supposed to be achieved? Especially in some schools that do mastery learning. This is what how and what they assess. And assessments for selection and comparison, which you're not going to be developing, but students have to use, have tested on regularly, norm and criterion reference testing. All of this is to provide acceptable evidence of learning, both formative and summative. What shows you that students have learned what it is you're hoping they will have learned? So the assessment types include tests and quizzes, academic prompts, informal checks for understanding, performance tasks, observations and dialogues, and you can probably think of many others to be included in acceptable evidence. What we're looking for in your development of your units is a bank of the 3 types of assessments that can include any of these: formative, summative, and performance. So what is performance assessment? It's also known as alternative or authentic assessment, which means it just has to do with real life. It's a form of testing that requires students to perform a task rather than select an answer from a ready-made list or from some source. For example, a student may be asked to explain historical events, generate scientific hypotheses, solve math problems, converse in a foreign language, or conduct research on an assigned topic. Those are academic prompts that are also can be performance tasks if they are phrased in a way that is a developmental process rather than, well, we'll talk about the 6 facets of understanding, rather than just concrete answers. The quality of the student's work is judged based on agreed upon set of criteria, usually a rubric, and you always want to introduce the rubrics to the students and have them, sometimes they'll even create the rubrics for the performance task, or you do it together. What is not authentic? I study, I take the test, I pass it, I forget what I learned. That's not authentic assessment. So we're looking at what can make assessment relevant to the students, relevant to the learning, and useful to you as an instructor or as a teacher. Performance tasks. Here you see the pizza slice, and the task is double the sector angle and double the radius. Any slice. Well, I can't do that, but that's a performance task. Although there are right answers to this, it still takes it off the paper and pencil and into the real life. Why is that important to be able to double the sector angle on a pizza? I can't answer that question. They're used to see if the learners can apply their learning to various issues, problems, situations, and contexts. They reflect the 6 facets of understanding, which I'll go over with you in a minute, and also Bloom-Anderson's hierarchy of learning. You have the taxonomies. Establish real-world contexts, and I think I really want to reinforce the whole idea of real-world contexts. If you have to do role-playing, make it as close to what would really happen in the real world as you possibly can. Use the GRASP format for the design of culminating performance tasks to make them more authentic and engaging. A culminating performance task is a task that brings everything together at the end of the entire unit. You're being asked to scratch out or sketch out your ideas for those, but you will not flesh those out until 621C. So just be prepared that you'll come back to those. But the reason you're going to do that now is because you want to see where you're going with this and how it's going to bring you back to meeting that big idea, hitting that big idea, those standards that you're aiming for. are evaluated using valid criteria and indicators, reflective not only of the quality of performance but desired results. There's really always rubrics always contain qualifications, quality elements as well as what the content is and should be. The 6 facets of understanding designed by Wiggins and McTighe are summarized most easily when you see this quote: teach it, use it, prove it, connect it, explain it, defend it, and read between the lines. What does that look like? Explanation, interpretation, application, perspective, empathy, and self-knowledge. So any way that you can get a performance task or any of your assessments, we talked about culturally relevant assessments, to include these elements of 6 facets of understanding in them, the stronger they will be in terms of meaningful feedback for you and for the students, because that's really what it's for, meaningful feedback, which in turn gives you the instructional next steps, or the student recognizes that they still have trouble with something. What do they need help with? So how do performance assessments work? I'm just going to give you a few examples here. These are not performance assessments are not limited to these examples. Open-ended or extended response exercises. Students might be asked to describe their observations, present arguments an historic character would make. What would Abraham Lincoln argue about the causes of the Civil War? Or you can, in the older students, you use satire cartoons. Now the name escapes me, but you see the one here with Uncle Sam and Woodrow Wilson, and there's a pile of money in between them. And he says, Woodrow, I'm proud of you. And like, what's the message here? What is the message? Why is Uncle Sam proud of Woodrow Wilson? What is it? What is that money about? And that's something that you would then study in your lessons for turn of the century. Extended tasks are assignments that require sustained attention in a single work area. And this is something you might consider for culminating performance tasks. Such tasks could include drafting, reviewing, and revising a poem. And then, of course, there's a whole topic and content area issue, and there's all sorts of things that can be surrounding that leads up to a particular poem. Conducting and explaining the results of a science experiment on photosynthesis using a multimedia presentation. Or writing, editing, and directing a short historical play, for example, the story of Ben Franklin and his kite. It varies, but extended tasks then become performance tasks. And portfolios, which are usually selections of a variety of performance-based work. And this is the only place where performance is actually not performance as in a synthesis. It is a synthesis, but it's not a performance that the student creates a project, but collects his or her good work over time, and it's collected in a portfolio, and it's evaluated according to the qualities needed in the portfolio to show parents, to show performance growth, performance on standards. An example of a multidisciplinary performance portfolio would be assessing 4th and 8th grade students in writing and math using 3 methods of portfolio, a best piece from the portfolio, and a set of performance tests. So it's all together. So the portfolio is actually combined with a set of maybe smaller performance tasks and a best piece from the portfolio itself. But you notice it is writing and math together. And maybe the writing includes some social studies content. So you've got a social studies standard, floating around in there, which can be articulated depending on what the unit of the lesson involves. So performance assessments take the perspective that assessment and instruction are inseparable aspects of teaching. They use a wide array of assessment strategies to determine how well students are doing, and this is particular portfolios, and to make instructional decisions. Always, even with a portfolio, you use systematic rating procedures. So if you have a rubric for a portfolio that you've decided to use for your unit, you include it in the unit. You include it in the appendices. Keep records of student performances on tasks and actively involve students keeping journals, evaluating their own work, whatever it takes for students to self-assess as well as for you to assess, because there should always be an element of self-reflection. The above methods, like all types of performance assessments, require that students actively develop their approaches to the task under defined conditions, knowing that their work will be evaluated according to agreed upon standards. Again, I can't reiterate enough how much important it is that students know how they're being evaluated. You all have your rubrics. You know what the rubrics involved. You know what's being looked for. You get a lot of feedback. Students need the same kind of attention. And also this speaks to scaffolding the instruction. The well-defined conditions are not only the conditions upon which they will be evaluated, but the defined conditions, you're stair-stepping them and giving them sections of learning up to where you want to go to this objective and to this goal and to this standard. This requirement distinguishes performance assessment from other forms of testing, because other forms of testing don't give agreed upon standards. They just say right or wrong. Ka-ching, there you are. So now let's look at how assessments meet objectives. So if you remember the objectives we had, what students should know, what they should be able to do, the K and the S. They should have a general knowledge about the Constitution, reasons for the Constitutional Convention, the role founding fathers played, and so forth. And what they should be able to do: vote for candidates running for office, extract information from books and articles, evaluate differences between candidates, and so forth. So you have the know and the knowledge and the skills, right? So we want to assess the knowledge and the skills. How are we going to determine what is acceptable evidence of their understanding of this knowledge and the use of these skills? We've made measurable objectives, again, knowledge and skills. Now we have general knowledge about the Constitution, how the Constitution affects our everyday lives, and the role the Founding Fathers played. We just selected 3 randomly from that original set that you just looked at. So what is acceptable evidence? What are the sources of evidence that tell us the students understand the Constitution? Acceptable evidence is that they will create, and it's always mostly about product, right? Create a post-instruction survey asking my classmates if they can remember 5 of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and make a graphic illustration of my findings to present to the class. The nice thing about this is it crosses math as a content area, as well as the social studies content area, and the use of technology. So you've got at least 3 content areas covered here. To show they understand how the Constitution affects their everyday lives, they write a 3-paragraph essay on how the language used to write the Constitution affects my life today. For example, what would happen if it was in German? How would life be different? There's a lot of hypothesizing involved in that, and some required development of knowledge, which will become background knowledge. And the 3rd objective, the role the Founding Fathers played in developing the Constitution. They fill in a Venn diagram about 2 of the Founding Fathers, having done some research on both of them. Similarities, differences in position, in life circumstances, and how they manage slaves. It can be a variety of things in this Venn diagram. So the first one is a performance, and formative and summative. It can be a performance task because it involves a lot of different aspects of their learning. Formative because it tells you how much they've understood about what you want them to know. And summative, it can be used at the end of a unit as a large learning piece. The 3-paragraph essay is a summative task. It is not a culminating performance task, but it does have them apply their knowledge to a situation. In this case, how would life be different if the national language were German rather than English? And finally, the Venn diagram, definitely formative, and you can use Venn diagrams as jumping boards for writing tasks. And summative, you can also use it at the end of a lesson, depending on the skills. The compare and contrast paragraph essay using the Venn diagram would be the summative part of that task. So you want to, this is the criteria for any assessment, the basics of any assessment. They are directly related to the objectives, as we just saw. They tell you who's doing the action involved in the assessment. Sometimes it's implied. If you have a starting prompt like the students will, ... that, or, semicolon, that'll work. What the task action is specifically, when and how it is to be completed, the time, the content of the assessment, and the criteria the task will be evaluated on, implicit in the details. So I'm going to show you a bad example and a good example of an assessment task. So here's the first example. The objective: the students will be able to describe the different economic positions between North and South during the Civil War and hypothesize why the 2 sides, could not agree. So this is a bad assessment item. Students will write their responses about the Civil War in a journal, include a Venn diagram. That's it. That's what the students are given. Not good. Why does this meet the criteria? So if you think back to the previous slide, and I'm just going to go through these 6 criteria. Is it directly related to the objective? Not sure. We don't know if it's about economic positions in the North and South. Number 2, do we know who's doing the action? Who's doing it? Yes, we know the students are doing it. It says the students will, so we know the students are going to do it. Number 3, do we know what the task action is specifically? Sort of. What kind of written response? How are they going to use that Venn diagram? Number 4, do we know when the task is to be completed? We have no idea. Are the journals weekly, daily? When is the Venn diagram due? No, none of that is available to us in information. Number 5, is the content of the task clear? There's no specifics in the task about what about the Civil War. What about the Civil War is this huge entity, historical entity. What are we writing about? Even though we have an objective, we have no idea what the journal writing is about. Not in this assessment prompt. Number 6, are the criteria clear? We don't have any criteria. We don't know if I've done it correctly. If you gave it to me, I don't know if I've done it correctly or incorrectly. What am I doing with the Venn diagram? How will I know what I'm supposed to put in the Venn diagram? So none of the criteria to be evaluated on is evident in that assessment item. So it really doesn't meet the basic criteria for a good assessment item or an effective assessment item. So if you gave me this prompt, you have to think about this. If you gave me this prompt as a substitute teacher, or if you gave me this prompt as a student, would I know what you wanted me to do? And the answer is not really. Would you know what to do using that assessment item? Let's look at another one. And this obviously is clear that when you're writing assessment items, you're going to include information that's going to make them rather big. And they're always the jumping off point for your instruction. So there's a very close relationship between the assessment items and your instruction. So here, this is a little bit different objective. The students will be able to describe the different economic positions between the North and South during the Civil War and hypothesize why the two sides couldn't agree. Formative. Students will keep a daily log during the Civil War lesson unit, writing a 1-paragraph summary of the Civil War reading, selection, or movie of the day. So even though the topic, the content isn't necessarily all that clear, you know that it's specific to what they're being instructed on, which is how they're related. In the case, the readings and the selection of the movie would be relative to economic positions between the North and the South, and the relationship follows that conversation. The summative, and so the students, that's ongoing. That's why it's formative. It's not a summative piece. The summative assessment, at the end of the unit, the students will write a 5-paragraph essay based on their journal notes. So they're using their journal to create this essay. Including in this essay will be an introduction to the problem, a description of at least one primary economic goal for both the North and the South, 3, a hypothesis based on their notes of why this North and South couldn't agree, and a conclusion stating how they think the problem could have been solved, which is the whole application of knowledge and showing they understand. Just technically, this is not a culminating performance task, but an academic prompt, because all they're doing is to asking to apply their understanding to using an essay as the vehicle. A culminating performance tasks uses more than just one element of production. So let's evaluate the criteria. Are these assessment items directly related to the objective? Yes, they are. Number 2, we know who's doing the action. The students are indicated in both assessment items, so students will do these things, and it's written in there. Simple, direct, not elaborated. Do we know what the task action is specifically? Yes, we do. We know very specifically what the student is expected to do. In the first case, write a 1-paragraph summary, and the second case, writing the 5-paragraph essay with these elements included. Do we know when the task is to be completed? It doesn't say exactly. Daily, definitely. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Yes, it does. Daily for the journal, and at the end of the unit for the essay. So very clear when the task is to be completed. The content of the assessment, number 5, yes, the economic positions of the North and the South during the Civil War. Clear, very clear. And simple and concise. You don't have to get very verbose. And number 6, what will they be evaluated on? You've got all the evaluation criteria in there. And although there's no evaluation criteria for the formative, that's okay because it is formative. At least they need to know how to write the 1-paragraph summary, which is one of the skills they need to have. So if I handed this to a substitute teacher, or if you handed this to me as a student, they would have a very good idea what to do and what is expected of them, and they wouldn't be calling you on the phone saying, "What am I supposed to do?" You want to be that clear when you're designing your assessments. So your next steps are to review, apply, and review and apply resources for Module 6. You are to use the UED template and design assessments or sources of acceptable evidence that align with each of your lesson objectives in the unit. In this section, you'll select and include assessments from all 3 categories: formative, summative, and performance. You're going to place these in the box next to the bank of objectives. So you're creating a bank of assessments, and you're going to use these to embed into your lesson. So you're going to have the bank of assessments, and then they are going to be applied to each of your lessons as you design the lessons. You will also want to draft a couple ideas for your culminating performance tasks, but these will not be fully developed until ED621C. I'll give you feedback on them, but they're not part of your grade. Just start thinking about a culminating performance task 2 for your unit. View the next screencast on working with English language learners, and from that screencast and the other material in the module, write your notes on the note-taking template and respond to those questions in Module 6 and post those to the discussion forum. Complete and submit your work on time, anytime before the due date. If they are on time, you'll receive feedback and time for revisions. Please do not send emails. And with that, I send you off to watching a little presentation on working with English language learners and then developing effective assessments.